Ladies and gentlemen, progress has never been exclusive to those with the highest IQ, the biggest bank accounts, or the most impressive pedigrees. More often, progress belongs to the quiet thinker willing to turn the problem upside down and ask the slightly uncomfortable question, what if I'm looking at this completely wrong? You see, while the world sprints forward, chasing every shiny possibility labeled success, very few step back and examine the potholes waiting to break their legs. The truth is simple. Avoiding lifelong failure is far easier than engineering lifelong brilliance. If you're searching for a strategy that will separate you from the crowd, start by avoiding their mistakes. Think backward, plan backward, and evaluate backward. Because if you can eliminate stupidity in your decisions, life has a funny way of looking a whole lot like intelligence. Most people spend their lives sprinting toward their personal definition of success. Yet very few take the time to investigate what consistently causes failure. Forward thinking is thrilling. Goal setting, ambition, and vision statements sound noble and productive, but they often lack the grounding that backward thinking provides. When individuals focus only on what they want, they risk stepping blindly into the same traps that have swallowed others. The greatest missteps aren't usually the result of insufficient dreams, but of unexamined assumptions. This is why a backward mentality, the discipline of identifying and removing known causes of trouble, is not a pessimistic approach, but an intelligent one. If someone wants a happy marriage, instead of asking only what makes love flourish, they should first ask what destroys it: resentment, dishonesty, and neglect. If a young entrepreneur wants a thriving business, they shouldn't obsess exclusively about scaling and brand recognition while ignoring the foundational killers: debt, poor hiring, and ignoring customers. Most failures in life are entirely predictable. What's lacking is the humility to observe them and the patience to avoid them. Part of the issue lies in human psychology. We are wired to look forward with optimism. It feels productive to envision winning. It feels uncomfortable to dwell on how we lose. Our schools celebrate goal setting but rarely teach the elimination of risk. Society applauds ambition but rarely prudence. As a result, generations chase what they want while repeating the same avoidable misjudgments. By shifting perspective, by thinking backward, we become less vulnerable to illusions of competence. The individual who asks, "What if I'm wrong?" is often far more prepared than the individual confidently proclaiming, "I know I'm right." Inversion offers a strategic advantage. You begin solving problems by removing the likely points of ruin before they manifest, and when the catastrophe never arrives, people call you lucky. But luck favors the prepared mind, and preventing failure compounds quietly and consistently over time. It doesn't produce applause, it produces resilience. Forward thinking seeks silver bullets. Backward thinking examines landmines. Success is often built not from spectacular innovation, but from the disciplined avoidance of stupidity. Most major advances in life are not 10 steps forward, they are the absence of 5 steps backward. When someone recognizes that preventing loss is just as valuable as achieving gain, they stop chasing miracle answers and begin eliminating obvious mistakes. The world is full of people burning energy in the direction of their dreams without ever questioning whether the road they are on is structurally flawed. The simple act of asking, "What would guarantee failure here?" may be the most underrated tool for improving outcomes. Avoiding stupidity is often more practical than chasing brilliance, because brilliance requires the perfect combination of skill, timing, knowledge, and opportunity, while stupidity simply requires lack of attention, poor judgment, or predictable human biases. When people chase brilliance, they are attempting something rare, exceptional, and difficult to replicate. When they avoid stupidity, they are filtering out common errors that have destroyed countless promising careers, investments, and relationships. It may not sound impressive to say I didn't make the same mistakes others made, yet this approach has built more enduring success stories than sudden flashes of genius. The problem with striving for brilliance exclusively is that it tempts ego. It encourages risky leaps, overconfidence, and the belief that the rules don't apply. Avoiding stupidity requires humility, the recognition that one is capable of error, that human perception is limited, and that caution isn't weakness. Most people prefer the heroic narrative of triumph, the thrilling pursuit of extraordinary solutions rather than the quiet discipline of preventing obvious blunders. History is filled with examples of individuals and organizations that didn't need to be geniuses to win. They simply avoided the pitfalls others walked into. Great investors often explain that their success isn't based on predicting the future with magical precision, but instead on refusing to do foolish things. Blind speculation, emotional trading, and ignoring risk. In personal life, avoiding stupidity takes the form of not lying, not overspending, not associating with harmful people, not ignoring health, not reacting impulsively, and not letting pride dictate decisions. These are not extraordinary talents, they are everyday disciplines. Yet they shape outcomes dramatically over time. Chasing brilliance, on the other hand, often leads people to overlook the small cracks that eventually become fatal fractures. The desire to be exceptional blinds them to the danger of being careless. Avoiding stupidity compounds because each mistake preserves resources, time, money, reputation, relationships, and these preserved resources can be reinvested intelligently. The person who doesn't fall into avoidable holes ends up further ahead simply because they are still standing. The marketplace consistently rewards those who stay in the game longest. And longevity is less about extraordinary intelligence and more about not self-sabotaging. Most failures in life don't come from external forces, but from self-inflicted harm disguised as confident decisions. It is seductive to believe one spectacular idea can outweigh years of reckless choices. In reality, slow, steady accumulation of non-mistakes outperforms rare strokes of brilliance that are often indistinguishable from luck. Avoiding stupidity may never earn applause, but it prevents disaster, and survival is the foundation upon which every success story is built. Thinking backward exposes biases, blind spots, and illusions of knowledge because it forces us to question the assumptions we comfortably stand on. When people think forward, they tend to focus on outcomes they desire, and in doing so, they selectively notice information that confirms their preferences. This creates confirmation bias, the silent architect of poor decisions. By reversing the question, asking not how to succeed but how one might fail, the mind becomes open to contradictions, weaknesses, and uncomfortable realities. Backward thinking interrupts the brain's desire to protect the ego and instead demands intellectual honesty. It transforms problems from optimistic guesses into clearer evaluations of risk. We often believe we know more than we do, not because we are truly informed, but because the story in our head sounds coherent. Thinking backward disrupts that coherence. It reveals that certainty is often a mask for incomplete understanding. Blind spots exist because the mind sees what it expects to see. When a person approaches a goal with an unchallenged viewpoint, they may overlook dangers simply because those dangers don't fit the narrative. Thinking backward undermines that narrative. It forces consideration of alternative scenarios, especially the ones we would prefer not to face. It is uncomfortable to entertain possibility of failure, yet that discomfort is the gateway to clarity. Illusions of knowledge are most dangerous when fueled by superficial familiarity. People believe because they have read about something, observed it once, or heard someone else confidently describe it, they now understand it. Backward thinking brings a healthy skepticism. It asks, what do I actually know, and what am I assuming? This single shift can prevent years of pursuing a flawed plan with confidence. Additionally, thinking backward expands perspective. Forward thinking narrows focus toward a target. Backward thinking widens the field to include threats. In business, this might mean identifying competitors you didn't originally perceive as competitors. In relationships, it might involve recognizing small habits that erode trust slowly rather than catastrophes that destroy it instantly. In personal development, it may highlight the repeated patterns that hold someone back more than any lack of ambition. People often believe success is about knowing more. Often it is about seeing more, especially the things one would rather ignore. By acknowledging that the mind is naturally biased, one can design better strategies that anticipate distortion rather than fall victim to it. Thinking backward isn't negativity, it is preparation. It takes humility to admit that our initial judgments may be flawed, and that humility can be the difference between reversible mistakes and irreversible consequences. Asking backward questions counteracts emotional impulses, tempers overconfidence, and guides choices with sober clarity rather than wishful thinking. Without backward thinking, people navigate with partial maps, believing they are complete. With it, they challenge their own certainty and discover that what they thought they knew was only a fragment of the full picture. Success is typically the leftover residue after removing repeated mistakes, because most achievements are not the result of a single extraordinary act, but the accumulation of countless actions that were simply not wrong. People often imagine success as a grand event, a breakthrough moment, a heroic leap, an explosion of opportunity, but in reality, success tends to emerge quietly from a life structured to avoid predictable failures. When E1 systematically eliminates the causes of repeated setbacks, poor decision-making, emotional reactions, negligence, inconsistency, or ignoring feedback, what remains is a path where progress is allowed to compound. Success grows not because brilliance forced it into existence, but because mistakes stopped suffocating it. Just as a garden grows when weeds are removed, goals often flourish when self-inflicted obstacles are cleared. Great outcomes often originate from ordinary principles applied consistently. Showing up on time, honoring commitments, learning from errors, saving more than spending, investing rather than gambling, listening more than speaking. These do not demand superhuman talent, yet they prevent the chronic failures that drain momentum. Repeated mistakes are expensive, not only in money, but in trust, reputation, confidence, and opportunity. By eliminating recurring errors, a person preserves these scarce resources and creates space for progress to take root. When someone stops sabotaging their health, their energy rises. When they stop acting impulsively, their judgment improves. When they stop burning bridges, their network expands. Each removal of self-imposed harm creates conditions where success becomes the default outcome, not the miraculous one. Another overlooked reality is that the world rewards consistency more than sporadic brilliance. A person who performs reliably is far more valuable than one who dazzles occasionally but collapses under pressure. Reliability is born from the absence of repeated mistakes. Whether in business, leadership, or personal relationships, trust is built when people do not have to constantly worry about surprises, excuses, or negligence. Once trust is established, opportunities multiply organically because others confidently align their efforts with yours. Consistency may not attract applause initially, but over time, it earns respect and influence. The concept of success as leftover residue also implies that many people fail not because they lack capability, but because they refuse to confront the flaws that repeatedly undermine their pursuits. Ignoring problems does not make them disappear. It allows them to mature into crises. Treating mistakes as learning tools rather than personal insults shifts a person from defensiveness to improvement. The person willing to analyze failure honestly becomes stronger with each setback, while the person protecting their ego remains vulnerable to the same errors. This willingness to inspect failure is itself a competitive advantage, because most people prefer rationalization over reflection. Viewed through this lens, success is less about discovering the perfect strategy and more about removing the known barriers. When the unnecessary is stripped away, the necessary becomes easier. When mistakes stop repeating, effort begins compounding. Progress that once felt impossible becomes natural. Success, then, is often not something newly acquired, but something finally revealed once persistent errors are no longer standing in the way. True advantage lies with the person willing to ask, how could this go terribly wrong? Because most people avoid this question, preferring the comfort of optimism over the discomfort of anticipating disaster. Human nature drives us to focus on what we want, what could succeed, and what looks promising, while ignoring the subtle lurking threats that could unravel plans. Yet the ability to systematically examine failure scenarios before taking action is what separates those who stumble repeatedly from those who endure and thrive. By asking how something could go wrong, an individual forces themselves to confront uncertainty, bias, and hidden risks that others overlook. This mindset transforms decision-making from a hopeful gamble into a disciplined exercise in risk mitigation and strategic foresight. It is not pessimism, it is preparation, and preparation compounds over time in ways that raw optimism never can. Most people are blind to the simple truth that failure is far more predictable than success. Markets crash, relationships break down, projects stall, and businesses falter, not because they were unforeseeable, but because the warning signs were ignored. When someone asks, how could this go terribly wrong? They engage in a mental simulation that exposes vulnerabilities. They consider worst-case scenarios, uncover hidden dependencies, and identify the small mistakes that, if ignored, could grow into catastrophic outcomes. This process builds resilience because it encourages proactive adjustments rather than reactive scrambling. By anticipating what could fail, a person designs strategies that are robust, flexible, and less likely to be derailed by circumstances beyond their control. Those unwilling to engage in this exercise leave themselves exposed, relying on luck to compensate for oversight, inexperience, or cognitive blind spots. The advantage of this mindset also lies in its compounding effect. Each time one examines potential failure and makes corrections, the margin of safety increases. In investing, this might mean avoiding a deal with hidden liabilities. In business, it might mean restructuring operations before minor inefficiencies snowball into crises. In personal life, it could mean addressing unhealthy habits before they become irreversible patterns. Repeatedly asking how things could go wrong creates a discipline of caution paired with action, which systematically reduces unnecessary risk. Over time, this approach accumulates not just avoided losses, but also credibility, reputation, and the confidence to take on challenges others would find too risky. Moreover, this practice sharpens judgment. People who habitually consider failure scenarios develop a keen sense for identifying subtle warning signs, reading patterns, and anticipating outcomes in complex systems. They become less reactive to shocks because they have mentally rehearsed contingencies, and they are less likely to overcommit or overestimate their abilities. While others chase opportunities blindly, the person willing to ask the hard question operates with clarity and control. They recognize avoiding major missteps often contributes more to lasting success than pursuing rare strokes of brilliance. This mindset instills both humility and pragmatism, qualities that compound quietly but decisively over a lifetime. In essence, advantage comes not from predicting every success, but from preparing for every failure. By systematically asking how things could go wrong, a person positions themselves ahead of the majority who navigate life with optimism untempered by caution. They gain foresight where others have blindness, resilience where others have fragility, and compounding benefits where others suffer repeated setbacks, creating a foundation for durable success that cannot easily be overturned by circumstance.